All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Evernest Property Management Show. I am one of your hosts, Spencer Sutton, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Matthew Whitaker. Matthew, welcome back to the show.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Excited to be here. Excited we're back in action, back being very consistent with this property management show. So hopefully everybody appreciates that out there as well.
Well, when it's part of my rock, I've got to make it happen, or else I'm not
or no
getting
bonus.
That's right. Or no bonus. That's right.
Amazing how that works.
It's just put a little money behind it, and it gets done. No comment. All right.
The carrot and the stick.
That's right. The carrot and the stick. Yeah. So also, I got my first glimpse of the first one that we did. So this is the third one since we've kind of revamped everything, got the studio. I took a look at the YouTube version of this. And so I want to encourage everybody. We have a YouTube channel just specifically for property management, and this show is aired on that. So if you prefer to watch your podcast, you can do it there, listen to it on YouTube. I mean, it's actually become the #1 podcasting platform in the world. Yeah. YouTube has. So pretty amazing.
Well, just warning, we have podcasting faces. So if you do watch it on YouTube, be warned.
Just be warned. You may run back. You may run back to Spotify real fast.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Let's get started. This is a great topic. The subject we're going to talk about today, Matthew, is and as we've grown the sales team and like we pay attention to sales for the past 10.5 years I've been here, we're going to talk about hiring, like the DNA of a killer BDM.
Yep.
And that's the way I like to phrase it. I like to phrase it a killer BDM because I think there's just a BDM that can like regurgitate information, and then there's a killer BDM.
Yeah, we'll get into it, but there's definitely a certain personality. When I think about killer, that type of personality is always done best here at Evernest.
Yeah, always done best, and so we'll talk about that. We'll get into that, but let's dive right in. I mean, why don't we, as we kick it off, just to give everybody a little bit of context, talk about maybe a brief history of the BDM position at Evernest, since you actually sat in that seat first.
Yeah, I mean, we still haven't found one as good as me yet.
Right, sure. And the audience has heard that like 10 times.
Well, for anybody who's new, I was the best BDM we ever had. But Spencer says, just because I would say yes to everything. Do you do this? Yes, we absolutely do that.
100%.
We'll go figure it out on the back end. Look, much like any business owner that starts a business, when we first got started, I was the one doing all the selling, and I was okay at it, but I was passionate about it. I was when the phone would ring on a Saturday or Sunday, I would pick it up. I would always answer it. And really what was interesting was we never started the business. If you've heard our story, we never started the business hoping to manage for other folks. It was really just so we could buy and sell houses to investors, and then we would keep the property management business. It's well known that I always said I never wanted to be a property manager or a real estate agent. But when we decided, hey, we are going to do this, I was the one that was doing it. I was keeping all of the data in an Excel spreadsheet, and I would figure out what my close rate was, and so
and you were closing around 30-something%.
I was, yeah. Now, I can't honestly tell you I was putting all the deals in there. You know, somebody may call me, and because I knew it wasn't going to be a deal, I wouldn't put it in there. But I was fairly consistent keeping up with the information. But it was also one of those things that it is easier to sell as the owner. Mm-hmm. And so I think really the first time I handed that off to somebody was probably to Matt Lavelle.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And Matt had a background in marketing. He had done he had owned his own business. He had just done some things. He was very much a generalist at the time, really smart guy, really understood the sales, the marketing and sales piece of this. And so, but it's kind of terrifying to hand that piece off to somebody because it's kind of the lifeblood of the business, right?
Mm-hmm, right.
When you're adding doors, you're just adding revenue. And if you hand that off to somebody, there's this learning curve that's associated with it. And they're probably going to miss some deals. And really early in your business, when you think about missing a deal, that may be $2,500 in annual revenue per year. That feels like a lot of money.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It still does today.
Yeah. 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 That's right. And I'm sure it is to everybody listening. But it's interesting because I think when you're a business owner, whether you are an engineer by like engineering personality or a sales personality or an operations personality, you have to sell. And so your motivation to sell is a lot different than a BDM that a property manager is going to hire, right?
And we also had a different background, you and I did, because we were in the business. We kind of knew what the pain points were, especially around those that owned a bunch of rental properties. So it was a little easier for us because we were just speaking the same language.
Yeah, that's right. So that was the history. You had it, then you passed it off to Matt Lavelle. I was hired shortly after in 2014 to run marketing. We had a salesperson. I think Matt Lavelle had moved into operations and hired a person to do sales. She was not all that. She was not doing a great job, and so we parted ways with her probably 2 months after I got there. And so I was doing sales. So I was a little bit doing sales and marketing. And then we hired Nick Goudreau and so on and so forth. So then we just started hiring salespeople. And so we've hired probably over the course of over the past 10 years, we probably hired
dozens, maybe over 50. I don't know, just like lots.
I think over 50.
Yeah.
Yeah. 50, 60. We've interviewed hundreds and
Probably
hundreds,
thousands.
maybe thousands of BDMs.
At least the organization has. We haven't.
Yeah. You and I haven't. Right. But so so that's the history. I have been very, very close to sales. Matthew has been very, very close to sales. So we have a little bit of knowledge of this, and we're going to be talking about this. We want to outline, like, this is what we see in a killer BDM. But first, I want to emphasize just the word killer, like we mentioned at the very beginning. This is highly important. So if you have predictive index, culture index, use the disc, whatever it is, I highly suggest you look at the personality profile of the person before you hire them. In our experience, these things tend to be a leading indicator of whether this person's going to do well or not going to do well.
For sure. When I think about this too, I think about somebody that is autonomous, likes to win, is energized by talking to people. Right. So for me, more of an introvert, I can talk to people and I can get up and perform when a phone call comes, but it does suck my energy.
Yeah.
The right BDM gets energized. The more they talk to people, the more energy they get. And so, yeah, absolutely finding the right personality. Now, could a introverted, highly detail-oriented person be a successful BDM? Yes. But are they going to be a successful BDM over long periods of time? And are you going to consistently find those people that aren't built to be talking all the time to be successful? I think of this sometimes as like Moneyball. And we have this debate internally all the time. And we say, well, if we're going to try to skew the possibility of us being right in our favor. Correct. And that's what Moneyball did. Great movie, great book if anybody hasn't read it. But the whole idea was they were basically looking at statistics and trying to say, is this person more likely than not to be successful in this position? And that's the way we think about personalities.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And looking at the personalities of the people who we on our team would be considered from the past all the way to present as killers, they all have the same thing.
Well, we actually went and looked at the old culture indexes of the people that we thought were now this was just a gut feel of who we thought the best were. And their profiles look pretty darn similar. I mean, they're wide, if you follow culture index or predictive index, they're like widespread trailblazers and persuaders and rainmakers, like people that were, they didn't have like a narrow spread. They had a really wide spread.
Yeah.
And the thing I told our head of these BDMs, I was like, some of these people are almost impossible to manage. You don't want them to be like culture killers, but they're kind of like out there running hard and they're really hard to manage. But that's the right type of BDM.
Yeah. They're breaking things. They're bringing in doors that maybe operations is rolling their eyes at, but they're so passionate about closing the deal, getting paid. That's something else we noticed.
Yeah. They like money.
They like money. They want to get paid. So you need to have a good compensation structure. but they were just motivated to win.
Yeah.
Like so much of it is about winning.
Yep.
And if you have somebody that doesn't want to win, then you'll have a mediocre BDM, and they may sign up doors, but they're going to sign up doors that are essentially layups that anybody could sign up.
Yeah, I think about Jim Collins always talks about if you have to tightly manage somebody, then they're the wrong person. And I would say in this position, if you have to almost like manage them at all, if you have to tell them to pick up the phone or you have to tell them to make their phone calls back, you have hired the wrong person. Like this person ought to just run, and they ought to be like a wild stallion that you're just trying to hold on for dear life.
Yeah, you're like, oh my goodness. I think probably you should be having these discussions. You should look back at your one-to-ones, at your people analyzers if you're doing that, and say, what am I telling this person? Am I saying, hey, you're doing an incredible job, or are you saying, hey, you need to stay up to date with your CRM. It's always behind. I'm noticing that you're like all of your tasks are way behind. You're a week behind on calling these people back. Like if you're having to say this over and over again, you just need to move on.
For sure.
All right, so let's get into our list. So I have like eight characteristics of a killer BDM. We're just going to rattle these off one by one. We'll stop briefly and talk about them. And I actually would love to hear from, if you're listening to this or you have further insights and you say, hey, I would add this to the list. Email me. I'd love to hear from you. I do hear from people from time to time.
Maybe put it in the comments on YouTube.
Yeah, put it in the comments on YouTube. Go to this YouTube video and put it in the comments. Would love to hear it because I think it's just really enlightening. And I know there are a lot of great BDMs out there. I know there are a lot of great owners and you have great BDMs. So kudos if you do, because they're very hard to find. You have to keep, you want to hold on to them as long as you can. And so make sure you're compensating them well. All right, number one is they know how to sell without selling. So when I thought about this, Matthew, I was thinking they're more consultants than anything. And I think this just comes from my personal experience because I had been in the real estate business and bought and sold a lot of houses. I was talking to investors from California. I was a consultant to them.
Yeah.
I was literally I wasn't trying to hard sell them.
Yeah.
It was, hey, I know what's best for you. I want to give you some advice.
You've even told the story of this group bringing us a huge portfolio and us saying, do not buy this.
Don't do it.
Please don't. Even though that would have meant 20 or 30 doors for us and a lot more management fees. It was just, we're very consultative. So the way I think about this too is every time that phone rings, somebody on the other end has a house problem. Mm-hmm. And the problem is, the answer to the problem is not always you need to rent your house. And what I think about when I think about our salespeople is, can you just be a resource for solving the problem? Mm-hmm. Now, one of the benefits of Evernest is we have a brokerage business. We have, we're kind of like deeply tied in real estate and we try to be the answer to as many of those problems as possible. But at the end of the day, are you willing to, even if Evernest is not the solution, to build trust by saying, hey, I think you should do this, or I think you should do that. And if you will, I think that comes across on the phone. Anytime you can build trust, you're just going to build in the community just a lot of really positive vibes around the brand. And we get so many leads, our salespeople just being a resource for solving problems. I think it'll be helpful. I think they'll sell more over time as a result of that. Yeah,
I think the challenge with BDMs from this standpoint is they tend not to think long-term. We'll talk a little bit about that later. They're thinking the here and now, and because they're money motivated, they're thinking, hey, this could be a commission, but I promise you they'll earn more and they'll get more good at it or get more commissions and get more benefit out of it if they are more consultative.
Couldn't agree more.
All right, number two here is they have a deep market and product knowledge. And again, this kind of comes from, I think your BDMs, you should spend a good amount of time. Part of this is just going to be reps and context. Like they're just going to have to, if you have somebody that doesn't have real estate experience, you and I had it. And so we understood it pretty well. I think somebody who did a great job of this for us would be somebody like Hunter, who now runs the sales team. He came into Birmingham. He moved from Florida. And he didn't know much about Birmingham real estate, but let me tell you something. He went out to find out what it was all about. And so he dug into podcasts and articles, listening to our podcast and all about Birmingham, best places to invest, and then just talk to local people. And he became an expert pretty quickly.
Yeah, and you can. I say with the inverse of this is when we did it wrong. When we first opened our Nashville market, we tried to organically start up in Nashville. That was our first place to move after Birmingham. And we were marketing and getting calls. And because we were not in Nashville, it was very hard for us to land deals. And because we did not understand the Nashville market, it was super hard. We even tried to give away 12 months of management fees for free. And people were like, I don't care if you give it to me for free, we're not still buying. So, like the more they can learn about the market, they need to get out of the office and go ride around, maybe even ride around with PMs or ride around with maintenance technicians and just understand the streets. There's a connection that is made when you have the contacts, because real estate is so local. And I think one of the challenges with us as we grow our national property management brand is we've got to maintain the local feel and we've got to maintain the local knowledge. And that's why we hire local people in the market.
Right.
But if you're trying to just hire a great salesperson, they don't have the context of the market, it's just never going to work.
Yeah, it doesn't work near as well. And I would even say a great way for them to learn would be to hang out with a property manager. Like property managers, if they've been doing it a while, know the streets, know the areas, know what a good house looks like, what a bad house looks like, and they can educate your BDM so that when they're having these conversations, they have more context. You can't just put them on the phone or else they're going to die a slow death, I think. I think you have to get them up to speed as best you can. All right. Number 3, this is a big one for us. This one is they follow up like a pro. And we have always said the fortune is in the follow-up.
I was trying to think of the quote you always said, and you absolutely nailed it. I think that business development people love the newness of a new lead. Mm-hmm. But what we have found is there is a long tail to this thing, and they need to follow up 7, 10, 12 times. I mean, some of that can be emails, but they need to pick up the phone and call people, because you never know when the situation changes and they're ready to make a move. And if our BDM is the last person that called them, we're more than likely going to get that deal.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and the great thing is CRMs will make this easy. So we've used Lead Simple for a long time.
Well, they'll make it clear whether you're doing it or not. It doesn't the CRM does not pick up the phone and call at this point.
It doesn't. And so I think the natural tendency is to take a CRM and say, well, hey, they'll automatically follow up with us with emails, automated texts, all this stuff. But it's never going to replace the BDM picking up the phone and somebody hearing that voice and just saying, hey, I'm just checking in with you. I know you weren't sure. You were thinking about putting your house on the market. I hadn't heard back from you. Just wanted to follow up. Just wanted to touch base with you.
Yeah, and I think the thing that a lot of salespeople miss is the discipline of this. Mm-hmm. Will reap big rewards. Yeah. I just really, we've seen it consistently happen over the years, and we just need to make sure that the discipline of the follow-up.
And again, going back to being consultative, I think also another great thing to do is if your BDM is paying attention to the market, paying attention to local news or whatever, and as it regards to real estate, they can clip things and send it to the person. Just, hey, I was just thinking about you. Here's an article I think you may enjoy. Again, they're setting themselves up as an expert and someone who wants to help them regardless of what they do.
Yep.
All right, so they follow up with a pro. Number 4 is they turn objections into opportunities. And so I was just thinking about objections that most people get. And so I mean, just think of some hey, your fees are high. If it's competitive, if you're competing against somebody in your market and you're charging 10%, they're charging 9% or whatever, somebody could say that. I'm not sure I need a manager. I can do it cheaper. My cousin can do it cheaper. So your killer salesperson needs to know how to handle these objections the right way.
I've heard a quote, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. Mm. And I think about that when I think about this, right? If somebody is throwing up big objections, they're probably in the hate category. So they're actually closer to a yes than somebody that is indifferent.
Yeah.
And I just think about when salespeople call me, indifference, email, indifference. And I just think like if they're willing to spend the time, throw up objections, then those are buying signals.
Yeah, they're buying signals, and a killer BDM will be thinking about this all the time. Well, how can I answer this objective? A BDM that's interested in easy wins and not willing to work for it, they're just going to move on to somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, you can have too many leads for a BDM.
Yeah,
and make it too easy. We want BDMs squeezing every single one of these leads. And if they just have too many, we've actually found a point of diminishing returns on the number of leads we give a team member.
Yeah. I know I experienced that at one point. It may have been, I can't remember. We lost a couple of BDMs. I was handling everything. This could have been 2019 or something like that. I just remember all day long, I sat in the office and I was calling people and having the same conversation over and over. And it got to be where I couldn't even follow up with people. Like I needed them to follow up with me. Hey, I'm still interested, because it was just too overwhelming.
I'm ready to jump in the boat.
Right. I'm ready to, and that's what, like, so if your person has too many leads, then you need to hire a second person. All right. Next is they know their numbers, data. So let's talk about this because, I mean, this is something that you and I have always, I think competitive people like to know their close percentage. They like to see the numbers. How are they stacking up? Are they doing a good job? If the goal is bringing on 30 doors in a month, how are they doing? Good, competitive, killer BDMs want to know the score.
Yeah, I think the first thing you got to do is make sure they're getting good data in.
Right. Yep.
And BDMs are notorious for not putting their information into the CRM, right? Oh, it's on a sticky note here, or it's written on a piece of paper over there. And so first thing you got to do is get your BDM, like day one, when you hire one, consistently putting the information into the CRM. It just, you're not going to get good data unless you have that. And then of course, yeah, like you need to be able to track the data, need to be able to know the numbers. I mean, at our scale now, we rely on the data more than anything. I mean, it's kind of how we know whether somebody's getting it or they're not. And we've seen some fairly predictable trends when somebody's starting, fairly predictable trends over the course of a year. Like we kind of know what someone should do based on what market they're in. And a BDM ought to know their numbers and ought to have expectations around number of doors they're going to land every month and be held accountable to that and bonus based on that.
Yeah, I think as we've dialed more and more into the data, I'm thinking about what are the things that we really like to look at. I love to look at close percentage for organic leads and close percentage for paid leads because I think they're going to be different. And so you need to understand that. I also like to look at speed to lead. So that's something we've talked about a lot. It's like, hey, how quickly are we getting back to these people? If we're waiting 24 hours to get back to a lead, then what in the world are we doing? This is completely unacceptable.
Yeah, somebody has a need. They've picked up the phone. They spent the time to call us, and now we're waiting a whole 24 hours. It doesn't send the right message or the right sense of urgency to that owner that called us.
And I can't tell you how many people, when we've gotten in touch with somebody, they've contacted 3 people, and maybe we're the only person to reach back to them. And that just, I don't understand that. But if your competition is like that, then more power to you. So you just need to make sure that they're calling back. So speed to lead, close percentage, doors in, all those things are very, very important. All right, next is they partner with the right people. So just thinking about this, I think as I was thinking about this, I believe that in a market you can have so many inbound leads that your BDM doesn't really need to be out in the market. Like this is the way when I took over Birmingham sales and I was doing it, we had so many inbound leads. I didn't really have time to go out and network. I wasn't going and doing realtor meetings and all that. But for some of you, maybe even in more competitive markets where the inbound leads are going to be harder to come by, you probably need to be out there. Your BDM needs to be out there meeting with realtors, meeting with, lenders, attorneys, definitely investors, just getting to know people. I think the BDMs that do really, really well in our ecosystem have done that.
Yeah. We've kind of broken this down into 3 positions today. As we've talked about on the show, you start out with a generalist, and like your first BDM ought to be very much a generalist. There's some relationships, there's some inbound stuff. It's very much a generalist. But as you've gotten bigger, it shows the 3 distinct buckets that a BDM needs to operate in. I would say the first one is what you talked about, the inbound, being able to take an organic or a pay-per-click lead and answer the phone, answer the questions, and do all the things they need to do to sell. The second piece is what I call true business development, which is somebody is in the market and is proactively building relationships with people. And you rattled off the list of a lot of those people, but it's part of the relationship sale. And then the third part is more of an outbound strategy. How do you go out and outbound sell? The outbound sell as you get bigger is probably like the last thing I would add. But as you start to develop, if you're just in one market, as you start to develop an organic following or you start to spend some money, you may even have the need to break this into 2 positions. Mm-hmm. But I think you also need to be crystal clear. If you just have one BDM, the expectation is don't be lazy. Don't just let leads come to you. You need to also proactively go get some. And that's where this relationship is. And, you have to have a really wide audience from a relationship standpoint. Agents will forget about you. Mm-hmm. Like if you're not staying in front of them. So this is all about consistency of staying in front. The sale here is there's a lot of discipline involved. And you think of great salespeople as traditionally being maybe undisciplined people, but not in this business. Like it's really important because there's so many different ways that leads come in, and we've got to be very consistent with how we reach back out.
Yeah, I think the challenge is if you bring a BDM onto the team, and I think starting with the second one is probably unrealistic. Like, hey, I want you to go out and just generate your own leads, and I'm going to pay you based on those leads. That is a very long, that ramp up is very long. I think, you drop somebody in the market and say, hey, you're responsible for bringing in your own leads and doors. It takes months and months to develop these relationships where they actually start paying off. And at least what I've seen in BDMs. And so I would say you need to be, as a business owner, you need to be prepared to provide leads. And then if they're not overwhelming, encourage them to go out and generate their own.
What do you think is a good number of leads that you should expect a BDM to be able to handle in a month?
Oh, wow. In a month, goodness.
Or is it better to think about it in terms of a week?
I look at weeks, and I'm thinking if a BDM is getting 10 to 15 leads every week, that's pretty busy because they're also following up with all the ones that they've got in their storehouse. They
start to stack up in the CRM.
Yeah, because they don't all close.
Yeah.
And so you're constantly, and so what you can do, at least in Lead Simple, you can go and look at their tasks and look at how many people they have in the backlog. And as they start getting the 10, 15 leads a week, they've starting to have a very full schedule. All right. Next on this list is they play the long game. This is more. This happens to be more kind of in line with the follow up, and it's not a transaction. I talked to the all of our BDMs earlier this week, and I spoke with the brokers team just a little while ago, and we were talking about creating content for how they can create content that builds trust and creates their own personal brand in the market. So as we were talking about this, the whole point was, listen, this is not to get a click today and turn into a client tomorrow. This is a long-term thing. And if you're consistent and if you add value, the whole thing you need to think about is not selling, it's adding value, becoming a trusted source of information in the market. Over time, this will pay dividends if you do it the right way. I believe this is what we've seen collectively as a company, but I'm encouraging them to do this themselves as well because I think it's that important. And so great BDMs are not just thinking about, hey, I got to close this deal this week, this month. They're also thinking long-term and going, hey, how can I'm thinking a year down. I want to be hunting whales, and I want to have a repository of information and trust I've built over time.
Yeah, this is really all about planting seeds. If they think they're just trying to extract value out of the first calls that come in, and I think that's where newbie salespeople, they're just trying to like land a deal, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But what we've seen is successful people over time. Going back to Hunter, he's a perfect example of this. I don't know if he's taken a call in 6 months or 12 months. I just don't think he has. But he still has people picking up the phone and calling him, and he still gets deals.
Yeah.
And those are just seeds that he's planted, relationships that he's planted over the years of him being here. And he's built trust with those folks. And that's where I think that, you may have a salesperson that only plans to be there for 12 months, and that wouldn't be the right person for you to hire if you can sniff that out, because they'll be very transactional. But it's really powerful as they build relationships within the market, and that referral business becomes great.
Yeah, it becomes great. I mean, something I think that Hunter did really well when he first got here. I mean, he jumped in because he wanted to win so bad. He jumped in with both feet, and he was going to BNI every single time they met. He was recording videos for LinkedIn, just short, helpful pieces of information, maybe a shift in the market, maybe what he's seeing in Birmingham locally, because a lot of out-of-state investors are interested in the city. So he was just very consistent with all of that. And I'm telling you, he built up a referral network of people who were calling him in no time. I was very surprised. Like, I hadn't seen anybody before him and really after him do that as well as he did.
Awesome.
So Hunter's had done a great job. So to me, he's a perfect example, and I would hope that all of our BDMs would look to him and say, "Hey, how can I model my business after the same way he did?"
Yeah, it's like mailbox money. You've done all the work up front, and you're going to consistently get those over the months and the years.
Correct. All right, last one here is they represent the brand with excellence. So I was at a conference recently, and someone was like, "Hey, I'm going to this party, and I'm going to go be around all these industry people." And I was like, "Great, have a great time. My only advice to you, or the only rule that I have, is represent the brand well. That's all. That's all I care about. You represent the brand well, whether you're at a party. I don't care what you do, as long as you represent the brand well." And this is the same thing we want from our BDMs, is because they are the face of the brand out in the market talking to new people. So we want them to be professional and friendly and, just represent the brand well, because it's so very important for them and for us.
Yeah, I'll tell you, when I think about this, I think about our trucks riding around the city, and the impression I have of an organization that has old, beat up trucks versus nice, clean, new trucks. I have the impression that, they're kind of like, beat up, and they're going to like cut corners, and versus the nice new trucks, like they take their job seriously. And I think that's the way it is with a BDM too. Mm-hmm. I think a BDM ought to represent the brand. People ought to get a positive vibe talking to the BDM about the brand. And if you're a business owner, you're building a brand. It's really important that you build a brand. And the team, the person you put forward that is people's first interaction with the brand, is going to leave a lasting impression. And so making sure that you're proud of your BDM, proud of what they, how they conduct themselves. I think that's really important.
Yeah. It's so very, very important. And, again, going back to, you want to trust this person out presenting to an audience of realtors, of brokerage, in a brokerage department, whatever the case is. So in the interview process, warning signs. You need to be looking for warning signs of them, whether they don't have the great use of the English language. Like, you probably don't want that person writing emails or communicating on the phone if they don't know proper English. I mean, I'm just being real, because I've looked at that stuff and thought, well, are they gonna represent the brand well? And if they're not, then you don't want to hire them.
Yeah.
All right, Matthew, this was it. These were all 8 of the DNA, 8 characteristics of killer BDMs. Anything in closing for this one?
Look, I know that there's definitely some anxiety when somebody goes to hire their first BDM. And maybe one question I would have for you as we wrap this up is, what is some advice for someone if they're first starting out and they're doing the selling right now, but they've heard, hey, I need to buy a BDM. I need to go hire a BDM. What would you tell them to look for
In a BDM?
in a BDM?
Yeah, I would, first I would look at yourself and really ascertain whether you really need someone or not, right? So a lot of people are going to tell you need somebody, and you can listen to a lot of people, oh, you need to hire somebody, but I think you need to understand your strengths and weaknesses. For you, Matthew, you were really good at selling because you wanted to win. You have that personality, you wanted to win. Now, it didn't give you energy to talk to a lot of people, but it was your business and you wanted to win. So you were perfectly fine doing that for a number of years. I remember talking to Mike Krause, and Mike and Adam did it for a long time. Like they're
the perfect combination of want to win and like relationship focus, extroverted.
100%. And so they were out meeting with people. They got energy from it. They love closing deals, but it finally got to like, hey, we have higher return things we want to do. So they hired their first BDM. So first, know yourself. And then second, if you like whatever you have seen, well, I just think when I'm sitting down with somebody in the interview process, I want to see, do they have the drive to win? To me, that's the number one thing. What in their past has proven that they've wanted to win? So if you're looking at the resume and you're walking them through the interview process and you're talking about their previous jobs, what are the signals that they've won? What are the signals that they had a strong desire to crush it and be better than the competition and be better than other people on their team? Like what has shown that to you, or what shows that to you? And I think as we've done that, as we've looked, it's been very obvious. And now, of course, we've made mistakes hiring BDMs because we've hired so many, but the ones that worked out really well and that were killers, we saw it in their past history.
The way I would say it is, you just looked at them and they're like, you're going to hire me. And we're like, okay, that's what you want in a BDM.
Yeah. Yeah, and I remember the first time, so we didn't even have a commission structure when we hired one BDM, and she pushed us for commission because she wanted to make more money. And I was like, well, that's a great signal.
Yeah. And I would leave at 6:00 and she was making phone calls in the evening because that's when most people would pick up the phone. And so making sure that you align incentives is also really important. We didn't really talk about that, but they like to make money, and aligning incentives with the organizations of bringing on more doors as much as possible, super important.
Yeah, I'll close with this story just to kind of give you an idea of how tenacious one of our BDMs was. She went with a friend of ours to an investor meetup here in the city, and they were all sitting, talking around. And so our friend, Brian, was introducing her to different people in the room. Hey, this so-and-so investor. And she met one of them, this guy and his wife. And she said, oh, you know what? I've actually emailed you. And he goes, no, I don't think you have. And she goes, oh yeah, I have. Pull up your phone. And he goes, look for this name. And she pulled it up. And he goes, well, there you have. She goes, yeah, I was wondering when you're going to call me back. So she was like, I want
guts.
Guts.
Yeah.
I'm going to be forward. I mean, she represented the brand well, but she was tenacious.
Yeah.
She didn't stop. And so we appreciated that about her.
Yep. That's awesome.
All right. That's it for this episode of the Evernest Property Management Show, everybody. We'll be back next week with a new episode. Have a good one.
Bye, everyone.
Look at the camera and say goodbye.